Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming this evening. Those of you in-house and those of you on HWCAM's YouTube channel, we appreciate the opportunity to present our tentative budget for the FY23 school year. This is part of my initial commentary when I took this position, is to be more transparent and open. To be able to be open about the budget is extremely important to me because it's a huge part of each of our communities' overall budgets, and certainly always worthy of a community conversation. So this opportunity is for people in our community to get an overview of what our budget looks like. We don't get into the deep, dark depths of everything, but we try to give an overview, and we'll also help people to understand what OPEB is. You'll hear about OPEB quite a bit this year, and I think it's important for people to understand what it is. So we will talk a little bit about that this evening, and we'll also show how OPEB will impact our budget through the next couple of fiscal years. So tonight, joining me is Director of Finance and Administration, Vincent Leone, and he is going to start out our presentation. My name is Eric Tracy. I'm the superintendent. Proud to be here. And without further ado, I will pass it on to Vinny.
Thank you, Eric. So tonight we're here to present to you the superintendent's approved FY23 tentative budget as it was approved at the school committee meeting on January 12th. So what this budget allows us to do is maintain level services across the board. There is no program, school, or level that is seeing a reduction in level service. It is either being reorganized or amplified in many different ways. This budget also allows us to make a lot of incremental investments across the district. The many main things are listed here. I'm going to briefly talk about a few of them. This budget allows us to address a growing social and emotional needs that we're seeing at the high school and the middle school with the addition of a 1.0 social worker. In addition, this budget is allowing us to reinstate and maintain our middle school world language offerings. It is also allowing us at the middle school to meet an increased need of small group math. In addition, this budget is amplifying the support we provide to the ELL program, which is the English language learners. In addition, if many of you remember, back in FY21, which I'm going to go through in a minute, we saw a lot of reductions to staff. So this budget is actually allowing us to reinstate a few of those positions we lost, including our out-of-district special ed chair position, is reinstating part of the payroll position in the business office that was cut. It is also reinstating a full-time district-wide curriculum director, as well as reinstating a lot of the athletic user fees that were reduced during that same time period. In addition, this budget is allowing us to address a lot of technological needs that we've seen grow during the onset of the pandemic, as well as address a lot of technology security issues. As many of you know, across the country, technology security is a growing issue, so we hope that this budget will allow us to address some of these needs and better address any issues that might come up. In addition, this budget is allowing us to make a pretty good investment in our elementary curriculum materials, as well as supply all 7th graders with iPads next year. So that is the big things that this budget allows us to do. Again, maintain level service and make incremental investments across the board. But in addition, 2 major items is a 1-year robust maintenance program, and it is allowing us to address our OPEB liability head on. Both of these 2 items I will talk through in a moment. So overall, just adjust that. Overall, this is our budget as it stands from a school or location area. You can see on the 3rd to last column here, our FY23 budget we are requesting approval for is amounting to $43.1 million. This is an increase over our FY22 budget of approximately $4.3 million and represents an increase of 11.3%. As I know you guys look at this, that looks like a big percent, but that is not what eventually the taxpayers will pay. I'm going to go through that later on in the slide and show you how that gets affected by our revenues. But overall, this is what we call our gross budget. This is everything all in. There are many revenue sources and other programs that come off the top before we eventually assess the taxpayers. But right now, the budget we are seeking approval for is roughly 43.1 million. So right now, I'm just going to kind of give a brief walkthrough on how the calculation is determined. So on the top line, you can see it's the same number from the previous slide. An overall FY23 budget of approximately 4.3 million. Again, this is our gross budget before we take any additional reoccurring offsets or revenue sources away. So you arrive at the 4.3 million. From there, we remove approximately 2.1 million, which is the total operating offsets, which is roughly an increase over the prior year of $390,000. So this is removed from our gross operating budget, which leaves a gross operating budget after offsets and overlays of roughly 4.9 million. From there, that same 4.9 million number is represented on the top of the slide. After you get to that number, you then take away our reoccurring revenue sources. These are items like our state aid, our state transportation, Medicaid reimbursements, and interest that we earn on a lot of our bank accounts. That total number is approximately 4.1 million. And then from there, the last number you see, our excess and deficiency, is approximately 3.1 million. And just to briefly talk about that for a second, I'm going to go more into where that number came from, but you can see in the column to the left of it, our FY22 budget, our E&D was zero. The basic way to explain E&D is the money you have left over in your prior year. A normal budget, we would like to see somewhere around 1 or 2% left over, which for us is anywhere between $0 and $600,000. The closer you get to zero, the more of a tight budget you had that year. But a healthy budget, again, would leave approximately anywhere between $0 and $600,000. For FY23, again, that number is coming in a lot higher at 3.1 million. And again, that is the last number that gets taken off the top before we assess the towns. So ultimately, after we remove all of our revenue sources, we're left with a net operating budget of approximately 33.6 million, which represents an increase of 857,000 or roughly 2.62%. This is ultimately the number that gets approved at town meeting. It's ultimately the number that is then used to assess the taxes. So again, that same $33.6 million number is carried up to the top, our net operating budget. From there, we apply our regional enrollment assessment, which is how many students live in Hamilton versus how many students live in Wenham. This is calculated on a 3-year rolling average as a snapshot on October 1st of every fiscal year. What we have seen for this budget cycle is a movement of approximately $380,000 being shifted away from Wenham and towards Hamilton because a more proportionate share of students currently live in Hamilton versus Wenham. So after you apply this assessment, you can see that the overall increase to Hamilton is coming in at roughly $875,000 and represents a 4.15% increase to Hamilton. But you can see what it's doing to Wenham. It is actually decreasing their assessment year over year by approximately $18,000. And again, this is because of the enrollment shift changing from Wenham going towards Hamilton. So now I try to get into what is excess and deficiency and where does it come from. So this is that $3.1 million number that I pointed out before. So to understand where that $3.1 million number came from, you really have to go back almost 2 fiscal years to March of 2020. This was when the COVID-19 pandemic started. At that time, we had, I believe, an approved tentative budget, but not an approved final budget. When the pandemic hit, We met with our state representatives and senators, and they informed our school committee to anticipate a nearly 20% reduction to all of our state funding. This includes the Chapter 70 funding, our regional transportation reimbursement, and our circuit breaker account. So a total 20% reduction across the board on those three accounts represented a reduction of approximately $1.2 million for the regional school district. To go about these cuts, at the time, we anticipated eliminating nearly 23 positions from our budget, which at the time represented a little more than $1 million. In addition to that, there were numerous reductions across the board that did not relate to payroll or staffing that totaled approximately $200,000. So combined, the school district saw a reduction of its staff of 23 people, which represented about 6% of our overall staff across the board, and again, a reduction of 1.2 million. So this is what our senators told us to anticipate, so we reacted and reduced our budget. But what ended up actually happening during FY21 was we didn't recognize that reduction of 1.2 million. We actually only saw a reduction of about $500,000. So we received approximately $773,000 above our revenue that we anticipated. So as many of you know, building your budget, you have to have both a balanced budget of revenues and expenses. So we budgeted anticipating receiving revenues of approximately 30 million. We ended up receiving revenues of 30,773,000. This additional $773,000 goes into your E&D, otherwise known as a surplus. I don't love using this word, but you can think of it as almost your profit at the end of the year. It's the money you have left over when you close the books at the end of the year. So this is half the equation. On the revenue side, we received $773,000 more. But in addition to that, on the expenditure side, mainly because of COVID-19, we saw a reduction in our spending. At the end of the year, we had left over approximately $2.2 million, which represented about 6% of our budget. Just to remind you again, we aim to be somewhere between 1% and 2%, around $300,000 to $600,000. You can see this is well beyond what we anticipated. Below, I broke out briefly, I included briefly what made up that 2.2 million. Most of it obviously has to do with the pandemic. Again, I'm going to roll through a couple of them so everyone can get an idea of what happened at the end of FY21. So as many of you remember, we started FY21 completely remote. I believe the first 2 or 3 weeks of school, children were not in school physically, and then throughout the rest of the year, they were in hybrid mode. So most of the time, they were not in the building, they were not consuming their normal supplies and materials, projects were not going on, they were not building things. So ultimately, at the end of the year, across the 5 schools, the 3 elementary schools, middle school, and high school, we saw the school-based supplies and materials leaving a balance of roughly $245,000. In addition to that, our unemployment costs were drastically reduced. As I showed you before, we estimated approximately 23 people were being terminated, and we budgeted unemployment for the full 26 weeks for every single one of those employees. As FY21 rolled on, only about 5 or 6 of those employees actually collected unemployment. So we originally budgeted approximately $350,000 for these unemployment costs, but only ended up spending somewhere around $50,000, leaving about $291,000 in unemployment alone. This wasn't foreseeable. Obviously, we didn't know if these employees were going to ultimately receive jobs at the beginning of the school year or when that would actually occur. Thankfully for us, they were able to find jobs or they did not seek unemployment, and we realized the savings of roughly $291,000. The next item is health insurance. This is a normal budget practice. We normally budget additional enrollments during the year because it's very unpredictable. An employee could walk in the business office at pretty much any point and tell us that their spouse has lost their job and they no longer have health insurance, and that is considered a qualifying event. Therefore, we would have to enroll them in our health insurance. So during the budget process, we purposely add in a few enrollees to cover us in case that situation occurs. During last school year, it did not occur. Therefore, we realized an additional savings of approximately $228,000. The next item revolves around professional development. District-wide, the school budgets approximately $650,000 in professional development. This is for teachers, administrators, TAs to either go out and seek professional development to advance their skills, or it is to have a consultant come in and apply the professional development in-house. But with the onset of the global pandemic, a lot of those instances were canceled. We were not sending teachers out to other districts to commingle with other districts in an attempt to not spread COVID-19. So a lot of these activities were canceled during the year. So we obviously did not expend the money, leaving roughly $133,000 unspent at year end. The next big item, is probably the second biggest item on the list, is our special ed transportation. As many of you know, as part of some of the IEP requirements, we have to provide transportation for some of our special ed students. Because of the pandemic, a lot of these students either did not physically attend their school, they attended it remotely, or their parents decided to drive them to the school rather than commingle them with other students and again spread COVID-19. So they decided to transport themselves. Thus, the district did not expend all of what we anticipated to expend on special ed transportation, leaving approximately $330,000 again unspent at the end of the year. In March, when the pandemic hit, the district adjusted its budget, not only freeing up the $1.27 million that we reduced, but we also freed up approximately $300,000 that we anticipated spending on PPE during the year. What eventually ended up happening is the state rolled out a lot of programs where they supplied the PPE for us for free. If they did not supply it for us for free, the federal government initiated COVID-19 grants that we ultimately used that funding to pay for the PPE. At the time, we did not realize that the government was going to issue a COVID-19 bailout to a lot of the schools. And because of that, we anticipated the $300,000 in expenses, but again, that didn't happen because of everything that rolled out from the federal government. The next item is our graduation and candlelight visual. This happens obviously at the end of the year for our graduates. Because again of the pandemic, we could not hold our normal graduation. We could not hold our normal candlelight visual, and it was a reduced expenditures because of that, realizing a savings of roughly $28,000 alone just from these two events. In addition, the DECA National Conference, because of COVID-19, was canceled. Our students did not attend, and because of that, we saved an additional $12,000. And then the biggest ticket item and the last item is all our unspent and unfilled positions. So during the year, there was not one single school day during the year where we were fully staffed. It was almost a revolving door amongst our staff. We had individuals leaving and coming in late. We had many positions that weren't filled until October or November of the year. I can probably name 3 or 4 positions off the top of my head that were vacant on the first day of school and were still vacant on the last day of school. So a lot of the services weren't being provided because the staff wasn't there to fill the positions, and ultimately across the board, we were left with nearly $780,000 of unspent payroll. Just the 3 positions I can name off the top of my head, our HR position went unfilled the whole entire year. We had an SLP position at the high school that was unfilled the entire year, and we had an IT technician position that was also unfilled the entire year. There were many other positions that were not filled during the year. They either were vacant for 1 month, like I said, or or they were filled late. So ultimately, the school district realized the savings of roughly $780,000 from our payroll expenses alone. So just to go through it again, we received $773,000 above our revenues, and we underspent our budget by approximately $2.2 million. These numbers are both added together to come up with the surplus we had left over at the end of the year of approximately $3.1 million. Doesn't want to click. So then the decision came is what to do with the surplus at the end of the year. So there was 3 decisions made during the town meeting in June of 2020, when we were seeking approval of the FY21 budget. We promised at that meeting to the taxpayers that if we ultimately realized that Chapter 70 money, if we ultimately received it at the end of the year, we would return it back to the towns in form of E&D. We are fulfilling that promise and returning back to the taxpayers approximately $773,000, which equals the excess Chapter 70 money that we received. That leaves approximately $2.3 million from the surplus left over in FY21. And the decision has been made to keep it with the current generation. So currently, this money was raised and appropriated for the students currently in school. They're the ones who did not receive the education. They're the ones who did not receive the services. Ultimately, the decision was made to split this $2.3 million. The first portion to go to extraordinary maintenance. Many of you know our buildings are aging. We currently have an application into the MSBA to seek a new elementary school. So the idea is to prolong the life of a lot of our equipment, especially at the high school, middle school, where we plan to keep these facilities open for decades to come. So the decision was made to invest an additional $325,000 of this $2.3 million to help extend the useful life of a lot of the equipment at this building. The remaining $2 million, the decision was made to invest in OPEB. And this is what I mean by keeping it with the current generation. So for those of you who don't know what OPEB is, I'm going to try to explain it as best I can. It is a little more confusing, but the best I can, by definition, OPEB stands for Other Post-Employment Benefits. So these are benefits other than the pension that U.S. governments and that the U.S. state and local governments provide to their employees. For Hamilton Wenham, that means mainly health insurance. So currently, the district covers approximately 60% of an employee's health insurance costs while they are employed. An additional benefit we give to them is to continue paying their health insurance while they are in retirement. So a current employee who's working for us now is accruing these benefits for when they retire. But right now, we're actually not paying for them. We're kicking the can down the road to the next generation to pay for. So the idea is to keep this funding with the current generation, the generation that suffered during the pandemic and did not receive the services. So the idea is that this money will go into a trust fund, will eventually accumulate interest and more principal added to it as years go on, thus reducing the tax burden of this next generation. So not only did they suffer from the pandemic, not only did they not receive the educational services that were promised to them, but we're trying to avoid adding additional debt to them, so to keep the funding with them to help them in the future when their future tax burden comes to pay for OPEB. Okay, so what happens if we don't invest in OPEB? So currently, as presented, our FY23 budget, as it stands on the left side, we're asking for a net operating budget of approximately $33.65 million, which again is that number right here. This left side of the chart is what's been presented tonight. It's what was approved as our tentative budget last week. So overall, just to go through it again, we're asking for a $33.6 million net budget, which represents a net increase of approximately $657,000 or a 2.62% increase. If we were to not invest in OPEB and return these funds to the towns, is what's represented on the right-hand side. So it would ultimately change our FY23 budget into an overall reduction of approximately 1.4 million, which in turn would mean a reduction to Hamilton's total assessment of roughly 645,000, or roughly a 3% reduction, and a reduction to Wenham of approximately 822,000, or roughly 7.5%. So again, all we are doing here is simply removing the expenditures for OPEB and letting it all flow through. So it's the one-time revenue source from E&D of 3.1 million that is driving this reduction. But what we always try to do when we build a budget is look not only at this year's budget, next year's budget that we're building, but also the budget after that. So currently we're in FY22, we're building our FY23 budget that we're presenting tonight, but we're also looking at FY24. What effect does our current budget that we're building have on our future budget? So if we were to roll forward the FY23 budget and incorporate the reduction of our E&D, which again comes out to a reduction of 1.4 million overall, when we roll forward our FY24 budget, you can see here that we might be looking at an overall increase to the taxpayers in FY24 of nearly 17%. Now again, this is because that revenue source goes away. This is one-time money that was only left over because of COVID-19. It is left over because all the programs were canceled and because we did not provide the services. In theory, at the end of FY22, we won't have this one-time revenue source anymore. It will not be there for FY24. Therefore, that $3.1 million, if nothing else changes, would ultimately be then placed upon the taxpayers to pay that additional costs, with no enrollment change would mean one of the towns would see an increase of approximately 16.5%, sorry. So just to bring it all back, that is not what we are asking for tonight. We are asking for the $3.3 million net operating increase, which is overall an increase of roughly 2.62% on the net operating budget. And that is the presentation.
Thank you, Vinny. Certainly we'll take questions from anybody here, and if you are on a HWCAM's YouTube channel and you have questions, you can go to our district website and you'll be able to funnel those through to us. Not immediately, but we plan to put together an FAQ based on any of the questions we get during the budget process that will help us to inform our final budget. The final budget vote will occur on February 10th, the evening of February 10th for the district. So the tentative budget has been voted in. And between now and then, there could be slight changes to the budget, which would result in a final budget number. But we'll take questions if anybody has any. Yes? Thank you.
So one of the things that's somewhat difficult for people to understand, and there's no handouts or anything, so is how you get from the original budget that you had of 41 that showed an increase of 11%, and then you get down to the net, is to explain how you go from the original 41 with an 11% increase. Because if you look at that 11% increase, while you're saying this isn't what we're asking for the town to pay, right now this is an 11% increase. How is that going to be sustainable going forward? You're replacing a bunch of positions, filling a bunch of positions that were previously eliminated. So maybe something also, if you could talk about why some of those positions need to be filled. why some of those expenses then need to be re-incurred would be helpful.
Sure, great, thank you. Let me back this up. So essentially, the first question is, how do we show the reduction from the original 11.2% to the 2.62% that we end up with? And 2 slides here will demonstrate our reasons why. The overall number of 11.3% is the gross, kind of the whole picture of the budget. After we look at that number, we start to look at what become operating offsets. And basically, those are revenues. So for instance, the first one on the list, school choice. School choice brings in approximately $5,000 per student that we take in from other communities. So right now we have 77 kids in the district that are school choice, times 5,000, that gives us a number. That number is variable, it changes each year depending on how many kids are accepted through the school choice program. And then if you look at other things, we have a preschool program, we charge a tuition. That tuition is used to reduce the budget even more. Any facilities rentals or even special ed grants. In previous budgets, special ed grants haven't been shown in the budget because they were kind of off to the side. We felt it important for transparency to put those in here. So reducing it again by whatever that grant amount we received. In this case, we're anticipating $470,000. And then grants from the federal government. One of them is an ESSER grant, which covers positions that are covered for this year. And this grant allows us to cover the 2 positions we hired for next year as well. So that's where you see the $147,000 in reductions. And then Title I is an entitlement program that all districts who have students that are eligible for Title I funding will receive from the state. We get that annually. That number, again, is variable depending on the number of kids that qualify for Title I funding, and it's variable across schools. Excuse me, not all schools are eligible based on the kids that are in the facility. So that's money that we, again, receive from the state. And then the circuit breaker offset is designed to offset any expenses above and beyond special ed related. That number also changes based on a statewide calculation. So those are all basically money coming in from outside sources or other sources. Those, again, are variable, but that's just a small chunk of some of the monies that come in. If you go back to the next slide, this one is about funding sources. So we receive state money like every other school. Yes, sorry?
Can I go back there?
Yeah, you can.
Okay, come up there. Yeah, so they can hear you all.
That'd be great.
Thanks. So this was a little difficult to see, just so that you know, sorry. Is there any kind of a handout, or will this be sent?
Yeah, everything's available on the website right now,
Awesome,
all
thank you.
of the slides from tonight.
Going back, you said there were 77 kids
Currently.
from out of district, and we get $5,000 for each one of those kids. Does that $5,000 sustain each student, or is there any outgoing money for the services that they require? Could you speak to that?
Sure, that's a great question. Generally, the kids that come in, we are not able to pick and choose. A lottery system is required by the state, so anybody that applies to a spot and is in the lottery, we actually draw them from a hat annually. So those kids are entering the school system as unknowns to us. So they come into the school system, they could be regular ed students, they could be special ed students, they could be students with a 504 plan or other medical plans. We don't know until we enroll them. So yes, there could be other costs associated with those particular students. It depends on what they're, if they have an IEP. So if you look at the 77 kids, 13 of those kids are on IEPs. And within that pile, there are associated costs. Some are none because we build them into the program that we already have. So I'll give you an example of a student who just needs academic support. That would be built right into the program. It doesn't really incur any new costs for us. Where you start to get into expenses is anything above and beyond that, services above and beyond that, specialized medical services or anything like that. That does happen, and again, we don't know until we enroll these students. but we're not allowed to say, sorry, you can't come. The doors are basically wide open. Yes? It's okay. That's what we want.
That's what we want. We want the question.
Yeah, we want it.
So do we have data then from past years or recent years about monies that went outgoing? Do we keep track of that?
Do you want to talk about that one?
We do receive an incremental reimbursement for all of these special ed costs. So yes, we do have data from prior years on what we received because of these additional incremental costs. So we can share that, how much we received, obviously not a per student basis, but overall we can definitely supply that information. Yep.
The other thing to keep in mind is we cost share with some of those kids as well, with the districts that they come from. So depending on the services that they need, there could be a cost share arrangement that's determined between the schools based on special ed law, based on the requirements of the child's IEP. So example, if we had to pay $10,000 for a specialized service, in some instances we would cost share that 50-50 with the community that the student comes from. That's just state and federal requirements in the law. There are also reimbursements that come from the state. So when you look at some of the funding, like circuit breaker, things like that, special ed funding that comes from the state, some of that money gets sent back to us. Some of the money that we outlay initially gets sent back to us. And they base that on what our enrollments are in March, right? On March 1st, I believe it is, for the following year. So it's actually a year behind. Does that make sense?
It'd be interesting to track year over year. Are we required to take a certain amount of students if they ask to come into our district? I know it's a gamble, we don't know.
Yeah.
Are we required, if they want to come, do we have to take them? Are we losing money every year? How much money are we losing every year, et cetera?
So that's a good question. Are we required to take school choice students? Every year before June 1st, the school committee is required by law to vote whether or not to take part in the school choice program or not. Oddly, the state set the limit to $5,000 back in 1993 and has never changed that number, so that's clearly an issue. But the program itself, we've voted in consistently here to participate. Once you do that, then you open the door, but not completely, because in our district, we fill seats. So example, as I was the former high school principal, I would look at English classes, and that's where every kid's enrolled, and start to look at seats that are available. So if there are 20 seats allotted in a particular class, and there's 2 seats open here and 1 seat open there, and we primarily look at 9th grade, then we know that we have a certain number of seats. And it's generally between 10 and 15 seats a year at the high school alone, because of the number of kids that transfer out of 8th grade to the tech or private schools, etc. So those are the types of situations you run into. And you really, again, we draw from a hat. We have to videotape it by law, and then give everybody a number, like first one is this number, second one is that, and then start reaching out. Last year, there were, I think, 28 people who applied to be in the school choice program at the high school. We went through the entire list and only filled 12 seats. We had 15 open. So some years it's like that, and other years you have more than you can ever imagine coming in, but you're still limited by our policy of only filling seats. We're not allowed to create a new class section like they did years ago. When I first got here, we were taking between 30 and 35 kids a year, which would have created a totally new class section that a teacher would have to add on to their load. So we no longer use that. We model around seats available, so basically seats on the bus. Does that make sense? Okay.
Can I add something?
Yeah, you want to add?
I'm just going to add something. I'm not saying I agree with this analogy, but when a lot of people talk about school choice, they usually use the empty seats on a plane analogy. Either way, the plane's going to take off. It's going to burn $300,000 of fuel no matter what, getting everyone to the destination. So if there are empty seats on the plane, why not reduce the cost a little bit so you can still make more money if that plane has to take off either way. So
data to support. So it would be interesting to look over a 5-year, 10-year period. Do we lose money every year? And is that a place we should be looking at?
Yeah, it's an interesting study. It's hard to quantify too. In 2012, maybe in 2013, when I first got here, I was on a committee to study school choice to try and figure out how to calculate a number for an individual kid coming in from, didn't matter the town, but then you'd look at everything. Like, once they're in your school, they qualify for everything. If they need free and reduced lunch, they qualify. If they need a scholarship for an iPad, they qualify. We can't treat them any differently. So yeah, there's a lot of cost involved. Even busing, like how would you calculate, transportation? In our case, in our community, we do not transport any school choice kids. There's no, we don't send a bus to Beverly or a bus to Georgetown to pick them up. So isn't a cost, but it's an idea of like, how do you figure out the value of a student in a 9th grade English class during, one period of the day, and then what's the value of that student based on the teacher's salary, and the next class is science. So it really becomes a puzzle that's almost unsolvable. And it's interesting, there's a study in the superintendent's office, it's about that thick. We did it, I think it was in 2012, just to try to answer that question. And the reality is, if you said, okay, we're gonna slowly drop the choice program, it's not gonna reduce the budget, because remember, we're filling seats on the plane. So you're just backing off a couple of seats here and a couple of seats there. Those classes will still exist. So it's really, for us, it's a revenue source of just under $500,000. And without that money, again, that's another $500,000 short, or the number is $385,000 short in your reduction ability. Does that answer your questions? Did I answer both of yours?
No, you're getting there.
Okay.
How do we get from the 41 down to the 32?
Yep.
But, I'm sorry, again, on the last one, Sarah?
This one.
Yeah.
Yep.
$200,000 there that's brand new. Why have we never seen that before? And how, my concern is the sustainability of it going forward.
Are you talking about the ESSER, where it says ESSER? So,
And the Title I.
yep, so ESSER,
And then the special ed is also like another 80 grand. Those are where the big differences are.
yeah, so the ESSER grant and the Title I grant were never shown in previous budgets. The ESSER grant, because we only got it this year, we just got it. So that's a one-time grant that the government gave out to offset COVID issues. So that's the reason you see that. Last year, we wouldn't have been able to show that number because we didn't have the actual number. We just got that this year. The Title I grant, same thing. We get that money every year from the state. It's just never been shown in the budget. This is what we've done this year, is try to be more transparent and say, we have this grant money available to us every year, no matter what. It changes slightly based on enrollments of kids who are eligible for Title I services, but it's part of a kind of, I hate to use the word income, but revenue source for the district.
Okay, but you've gotten it in the past, so why didn't you put it in there? In other words, you said we've gotten it in the past, but it hasn't been displayed in the budget.
Sure.
Because
It didn't show up for the other fiscal years. And how come it has such a big impact on the offsets this year?
So the reason we didn't add it in the other years is because if we were to go back and enter in the budget amount for what we received, it'll throw off what our prior assessments were to the towns. And it won't agree to what was actually approved at town meeting. So if we added in on this column here for FY22, $65,000 in Title I, it's ultimately going to change the bottom line assessment, which was not approved at town meeting. So it makes it a different number.
The other thing that may clarify this, the monies weren't shown in the budget in the past, and this is my 3.5 month here, so the monies weren't shown in the past, neither were the positions. So if you were a grant position holder, you generally didn't show in the budget, correct? Yeah. So when you looked at the big picture, they were outside of the budget in the past until we decided this year to make sure we showed everything. So if you were looking at last year's budget, there were positions that were grant funded by this Title I money that did not show up as an FTE in the overall budget. So it didn't impact anything. So this year we moved those positions into the open so people could see those positions. They've been here for years because that money comes in annually automatically. And then we also showed the money. We thought it was important to show everything to the towns.
Okay, I think I understand what you're saying, but
where it is needed.
Absolutely. I don't disagree with you. I just don't have any ability to go back and change the previous budgets, so.
And it was our attempt to be more transparent
Yeah.
and show what actual level of service is happening.
Yeah.
Definitely appreciate it.
I think it's important to put all of those numbers out there so that people understand like where the revenue sources are. And some of those revenue sources come every year. Like Title I comes every year. We just have to accept the money and adjust the grants based on the numbers of kids that qualify for the programs. And that money is very specific. It can only be used at a Title I school for a Title I service. So, yeah, so when you get into entitlement grants, they are very specific to their use. So if you have a school that has a number of kids who qualify for Title I services, that's how the state will say, okay, the money goes here in this percentage. So we have 2 schools that qualify, and the money can only be used in those schools. And in our case, it's something, when you look at a tutor, we add tutors and TAs to our programs for supports for those kids. It's generally what it's used for.
Is it use it or lose it every year? 200, that's it? You have to use it, exhaust it?
Otherwise, you lose it. They do give you an extended period of time of roughly 18 months, but
But it'll go
generally
away if you don't
speaking,
use it.
you don't use it, you lose it, yes.
So I'm going to continue on down the reduction road here. So you have this segment that we just went over of revenues that come in to the district, and that brings us to the second slide. These are resources that come in annually as well, like our Chapter 70 state aid. That is a calculation done by the state for every school, which is basically sent to each school as to reduce your budget by a particular amount. So in our case, we're going to receive, we're anticipating receiving 3.7 million. That number could go up or down slightly, but that's what we're anticipating based on what we received last year. It's generally not a huge increase, but it's a pretty consistent number. They're pretty close. As you can see along the way, they get slightly increased over the years by the state based on a number of things. State transportation covers our transportation costs to a percentage, a small percentage, I forget what it is.
It changes every year, but I believe last year was around 67%.
67% of our transportation costs. So that comes from the state every year annually. And then anything that you would get, like interest income that you receive, shows up here. That's at 40, I think it's 45,000.
30.
Excuse me, 30,000. And then, what's the last one? Medicaid reimbursement. So Medicaid, we have students who are generally on IEPs, sometimes 504s, generally on IEPs with medical disabilities that we can apply for reimbursement for some of their services. So there's another opportunity the government gives us to receive some money for money that we need to outlay in our budget for services for kids. So if you have a student who's medically fragile, may need nursing care through the day, those types of things can be applied for reimbursement from the state. Does that make sense? Okay, so those 2 slides together give us the total amount that we reduce the original number, and I'll go back again.
But the big hit is the excess and deficiencies.
Correct, that's
Yes.
the big change
Yeah,
year over year.
that's the big change year over year. Yep.
So, I just wanted to call that.
Yeah,
That's why there's a big jump from 4 to 7.
correct.
So we're just-
That excess and deficiency is the OPEB money and the $325,000 that is included in the extraordinary maintenance costs, and then the $700-ish thousand that will go back to the towns. So that automatically will go back. And then the OPEB will hopefully get invested so that we can offset future liabilities. We have, you start to figure out 220 retirees that you're still supporting on your health insurance system over time. That number becomes very big very quickly and impacts our budget. The idea of the OPEB is to invest the money for the future so that you can now use that money to pay for that future liability. One of the things, teachers retire earlier. They retire, most are eligible for retirement around 57 and a half. And then people are living longer. So those are liabilities we're hoping to cover for the future by investing this money. This has also been a push from both communities in the past 3 years to fund this OPEB. It should have been funded starting, I think, 10 years ago. I think 10 years ago the discussion started and never got off the ground, really kind of just bubbled and gurgled and was put off. This is an opportunity for us to start to invest in that. And then our plan is to continue investing in that, excuse me, to the tune of about $100,000 to $200,000 a year, depending on what the budget looks like. And both communities have OPEB funds as well. So these are used to offset our future liabilities. It's important. It's an important opportunity we have. So we unfortunately didn't spend our entire budget, but that money can really benefit the school system and the two towns in the future. Does that make that good? Okay. Other questions?
So if we go back to the slide that shows the 31 or whatever.
Yep. I'm going to plug in here.
Just take a second. So the question then, for me,
Yep.
okay, so you have 41, and 3.1 or whatever that is, but that 41 comes from the old, it's essentially the excess and deficiency.
Yep.
That's going to the old.
Yep.
Okay, so if we treat that as we were treating the rent before, let's say we take that out, that drops the budget then to 38.
Roughly, yep.
Yes. So then, the 38 is offset.
It's good.
Hold on one second. It'll be easier to have slides available.
We have the budget for these laptops.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
think it's okay. Let's hope not. I think it's the only PC in the district though, so.
So that's the part that people get confused about. If you can just explain that, take the $3 million off the OPEB, that brings us to 38, and then 38, how are we getting down to what we're asking for? Because this total budget, really, that you're referring to is the 38, not the 41.
Correct, because it has that one-time expenditures for OPEB and extraordinary.
It took me like 10 meetings.
So that's right, that's why I'm asking you to explain it, because a lot of people don't get it.
Well, yeah, I mean, it takes a lot of effort.
So how does the 38 compare with budgets in the past? To be sustainable. And
So when we go to build the FY24 budget, that 43,155 will automatically be reduced before we even do anything by 2.3 million. Because that 4.3 includes the one-time expenditures for OPEB and extraordinary maintenance. Tough to see.
Yeah.
so this is what I'm talking about, that gets
Confusing, right? Is that you look at the operating expense, the top line there, right? You have a huge jump that you're showing, whereas it goes from 37 to 34 to 38, and then all of a sudden this huge jump up to 43. But the 43 is there because it includes the $3 million for the OPEB money, which is from the excess and deficiency. So the problem that people have is trying to understand this is, am I going to have to pay $43 million now every single year, or am I going to, is that where I'm starting from? That's the part that people don't understand.
Right.
All of the numbers that are in the budget, you're taking the offsets there, the roughly 2.2 million.
Yep.
Okay, and now you're saying, okay, well now we really only need this much money. That's the part that
It's
is
confusing.
difficult to understand.
Sure.
Okay, and then if we look at what that number is, roughly 38, I don't know what,
Yeah.
38 something. You have said at the beginning of your presentation, we wanted to add in all of these positions. We want to give 7th graders iPads. I'm not sure why we need to do that. Can you go through and explain maybe some of that? Why do we need another curriculum director? Why are we giving iPads? I don't remember what the other things are.
Let me do that for you. Go back to that. It's there. So one of the issues we're running into with kids this year is dysregulation. Kids from pre-K all the way up to 12, came into school and they were kind of all over the place. We're dealing with lots of social emotional issues. We're dealing with kids who are being hospitalized. Right now we have, I think, 9 kids that are hospitalized or have been hospitalized for mental health issues. We're seeing a huge increase in mental health issues based on isolation and some of the other things that occurred along the way here with COVID. Even teaching kids how to re-regulate to school. So that first position there is basically designed to help to carry the load that our current counseling staff is carrying at the middle and high school levels. They're seeing a tremendous increase in a number of kids that need emotional services in the facility. Excuse me. Last year we reduced the language program. 6th grade basically wiped out, so there was a call from parents to reinstate that program at the 6th grade level. There was a committee that was formed to study that even recommended we try to go down further, but financially it's probably not real or realistic to do. So we decided to just reinstate that initial position for world language so that we could give the kids in the 6th grade that same opportunity. And again, in response to calls from parents and from the community. The kids that we have in IEPs that are coming up in our 5th grade, some of our kids in our language-based program need smaller classes as per their IEPs. So in order to do that, we need to increase our math class availability. We have to add 2 classes to be able to take on the number of students that need to be in smaller classes for mathematics. And this is based on their IEP and or disability. ELL, we've seen a huge increase. I mean, when I first got here 9 years ago, I think we had 1 or 2 kids that would qualify for ELL services or EL services. And now we've seen, English language learners. Kids whose first language is not English. Thank you. So kids are increased. We've seen an increase. We started out the year with 16 students, a number of them in the younger grades, kindergarten, 1st grade classes, who need specialized skills. In the budget, we had originally budgeted for 3 part-time people to tutor those kids. We're not meeting the requirements of the law and or the needs of these kids and also the teachers in the classroom. So basically this is a trade out. We reduced our tutors from 3 to 2 and then added this position in. So it's not a full add. Some of it gets taken up by a tutorial position that will become a teaching position, which will help us to meet the requirements of state and federal laws. OOD is out-of-district students. Currently we have 43 students who are out-of-district, and they are in specialized placements based on disability, IEP or 504. They are kids who still need all of the requirements of special ed. Annual meetings, triennial meetings, services that are related to progress reporting. All of those services we still are responsible for, even though the child is not in our school system. So what happens is we end up kind of robbing from Paul to pay Peter. We'll take a teacher out of, one of our special ed teachers who can test, for instance, take them out of class, put a sub in, and then send that teacher off somewhere. It could be a local community like as close as Beverly or Danvers, and it could be, we have placements as far away as New Hampshire. So that person now has to go there and be part of the testing program, do the testing for us, also be part of the team meeting. So that, again, is putting a huge strain on our current staff, our current special ed staff. Currently 19% of our kids qualify for special ed services in the district, which is a pretty good number for a district this size. The out-of-district coordinator would take on that load and excesses across the district in various areas. We had the special ed presentation at the school committee meeting last week, the last school committee meeting from the special ed staff, and the 2 coordinators who manage our meetings for both the secondary and elementary levels carry quite a load of kids, in some cases over 100 kids that they're responsible for keeping an eye on. And then now we're saying, okay, we want you or your staff to go to, Plastown, New Hampshire, to go test a kid, which takes, time to get there, 3 to 4 hours or 5 hours of testing, and then time to come back. So that meanwhile, the kids who had services here miss out on those services. So this gives us an opportunity to pick up that slack and have us to meet the needs of our kids in our IEPs.
So those out-of-district kids, those are not kids that school choice, someplace else.
Correct. Those are our students who need to be in a specialized program. Yep. There are kids in the district who choice out, but this group of kids is specific to a specialized program. And it could be as close as Landmark School or something even further away. It could be a day program where we're paying to transport a child to and from and paying for the service. It could be a residential program where we're paying for the child to live there, stay there, 24/7 without a transportation cost. And those expenses get up to $250,000 per kid. So there's really a need so that we're not dragging from the services that we're trying to present here. We run our district with no HR person and no payroll person. We have Vinny here who does not only the district finances, books, he also does HR and payroll, which is, in my 3 months, insane. It's not sustainable for him or his administrative assistant to continue to do that work. And in reality, we are not doing a very good job meeting the requirements that we have to do. So we're targeting that as an important piece of our increases that were cut back in the 2020 budget planning sessions. The curriculum director, that is actually already a position in the budget. We are proposing to add 0.3, so basically 30% of the job to make it a full-time job. Currently, it's a 7.7 position, 0.7 full-time equivalent, which is about a 70% of a position. This person is doing the job, if you went back 2 years, of 3 people. So they're managing the elementary level for all 3 schools. There used to be a person to do it for math at the elementary level and for English at the elementary level, so now it's just one person. And then we're proposing to expand that position so that they can also pick up some of the curriculum organization and manage the curriculum leaders that we have currently in place at the high school and middle school levels. So that's a partial increase, not a full position. Question? Okay. I'm getting there. Yeah, I'm getting there. Athletic user fees. So they were cut for last year down to 25%. The district would pay 25%. If your kid is involved in 1 or 3 sports, you knew it because it hurt. We understand that. This year, the school committee, initially we came forward with the first budget in December, right? Early December with a 5% increase. Figure, okay, we can increase it 5% and that will at least start moving in the right direction. After conversations with the school committee, they felt it was important to try and bump it up a little bit more. So we added another 5%, so we're up to 35% from the district side. So.
Can I ask Eric, I don't think that people that families that don't have kids at the high school level yet understand the kind of fees that we manage at the high school level. So when you say, I just want people to understand, when you say we pay for 3 sports, which last year we used to pay for 2.
Yep.
Last year we paid for 3 and the 4th one was free because we had that
Extra season, right.
between season. When you're talking upwards of over it could be $3,000 per child. And I'm going to tell you that people that don't have a child at the high school yet, it's going to be a massive eye-opener for them. And I think that this agenda item comes up throughout the year, every single year, only because it's never even touches, it's not ever in line with any other districts around us. It always seems to be like this up in the air, we need to put more money somewhere else. So, well, I think we'll just charge, more to the families. It's a lot of money. It's not
Yeah.
going to be overlooked, I guess. that, we wanna, you know, you don't want your kid to be slighted the opportunity to participate because it was $1,100 to play football for one child.
Right.
So if you have two, and many people have two kids in high school at the same time, that's $2,200 to play one sport.
Right.
I just want to highlight.
And that's, it's important to highlight because I think, I mean, I agree with you. I firmly believe in what Craig Genualdo always says. Athletics is a second school day for kids. You know, they're involved, they're doing what we're asking them to do. Be involved at school and, you know, do the things. So I think it's important for us to continue to look at that. There is a commitment from the, we have subcommittees of the school committee. The capital finance subcommittee is actually examining this, I think, next meeting, right? Because it's important for us to try and do something more with this. We just didn't feel it was appropriate to ratchet it all the way up in the budget and then try to explain it, you know, we're just trying to reduce the cost of sports. So we try to balance it out and hit it a little bit at a time. And every 5% increase of that particular budget is about $29,400. So then we start to, you know, every time you go up 5%, you're gonna add about $30,000 to the cost of.
But we could be thinking, we rack up brains every year, would the bus costs go up exponentially, field costs, why would it be different here than somewhere else?
Yeah.
It's mind-boggling. It seems like when you get a group of people that come to school committee and say, okay, this is becoming wildly out of control, hockey, $1,200. You know, all of a sudden, it can be reduced that one year. But
Yeah.
yet next year, it's up again. So it just always seems like this, you know, open, I don't know.
Yeah.
Very.
Well, you have a commitment from me that we're going to continue to look at it because I think it's important. I mean, I'm a former high school athlete. I played 3 sports. I was captain of football and baseball. I understand, you know, the realities of it, and and again, I think it's important for the growth of our kids, and I think we all understand that, and it's part of what I wrestle with as a superintendent. When you start to look at the value of your school system, you want to start to look at all of those items, like your fields, your facilities, you know, what we're paying for things, what things are costing us. So iPads are another example. You know, all of a sudden you're going to put a kid into football and hockey and lacrosse at the tune of $3,000, and then, by the way, there's a cost for an iPad as well. So I truly understand where it's coming from, and I think it's important to know that the school committee is having this conversation right now in our subcommittee of what's called capital finance and planning, because we're looking at options like, how do we level it out? Can we just charge a fee, one flat fee, if you play sports? So we're looking at all of those numbers and trying to just figure out how it'll work. So I will stay on that. I think it's important. I just really believe if we're doing the right thing for our kids, then it's something that we need to look at. And it's not just sports either. It's theater. Kids pay to be in the play. You pay, I think the last fee kids paid, last time we had a full play was $325 to be in the play. And that stuff is the stuff that bothers me, and that, you know, Vinny as well. Yeah, instruments, you're paying for an instrument. There's all kinds of costs along the way, and they seem to just continue to creep up as your kids get older. So I appreciate the comment. I really agree with you. I think it's something that we need to take a serious look at. Julia Campbell from the school committee.
We are facing huge pressure from both the towns to cut our budget by $1 million. So if you want to continue level services, if you want to up the athletics user fees, if you want all of this stuff, you need to talk to the select board in Hamilton and the select board in Wenham, because we are under constant pressure. I know Eric, I know Vinny, the school committee, to cut our budget, cut it everywhere, cut it every which way. So just know that we're listening to the taxpayers, and we are under huge pressure from the taxpayers and from the towns to cut our budget. I think at the last meeting, which was a public meeting on Zoom, they wanted us to cut it another $1 million. So
Yeah.
I think you'd encourage it.
Yeah, thanks. And it's tough. You start to look at $1 million cut, you're looking at positions, and that's going to impact kids. Impacts programs, impacts the quality of your school, and reduces the value to people. It gives them the opportunity to walk somewhere else. You know, we have a huge number of kids who live in our communities who do not attend our schools. And I think that's important for people to know. When you talk to them, they talk about all of these things, athletic fees, they talk about our facilities, they talk about our you know, both outside and inside facilities, and the things that kids don't have when they come here that they might have in another school. So it's an important conversation to continue, and it's certainly not going to happen overnight, but we're looking at different options to try and keep things up. And as Vinny said, you know, the $325,000 for us is a tiny blip on the screen to be able to help fix things like roof ventilators that are at end of life, classroom univents that are at end of life already, and replacing windows in the middle school because they're no good already. You know, so all those types of things we're trying to put in some type of a line. So we're going to I am going to produce, we're almost done, a report on the state of the facilities of all of our facilities within the district. And I think it's important for the communities to understand the state our schools are really in and what it's going to take to become, you know, kind of top-notch blue ribbon schools. And it's the first, you know, kind of the first look at this is what we really need. And there's, you know, we've talked about a new elementary school. We know the high school needs a new roof. That's a $3 to $5 million expense. We know our fields we're the only schools in the league with fields that are not turf and that are in the condition they're in, with tracks that will probably not be able to run on competitively in years. Those things are all part of this conversation, the budget down the road, like what this is going to look like. And there's a reality of the ability of our communities to be able to produce revenues. There are no increases in revenues generally for either community because we're so residentially based, and I think that's important as well. So we have to find that. We have to find some balance there as well. So I'm going to continue on the list. Technology. Think back to a year and a half ago in the city of Haverhill, got shut down by a ransomware attack. The school department was shut down for a couple of weeks because of a ransomware attack. They could not use any of their tech in the buildings for anything. So any devices they had, any online anything were unable to be used. Our tech team takes that stuff very seriously. We're looking at relayering and building a security system that will help us to protect against that, but also give us that 24/7 security to manage some of those threats as they grow. And it's a daily threat. I mean, we get phishing emails in our email systems here every single day. Every single day. They come in different forms, and you know, it's an education process, but it's also us trying to improve the technologies that we have so that we don't get shut down, so that our systems don't get shut down for a week or 2 weeks. So that's part of that technology increase. And then curriculum materials. One of the things I've noticed, if you go back to my entry plan, I've really been trying to focus on what we have and don't have available for kids. At the elementary level, we do not have in each school the same things for kids to use in classrooms, which is fascinating to me. And it's part of kind of my view, along with others, the principals, and talking and comparing. So we're trying to bring kids into the same kind of realm, if you will, so give them the same opportunities, the same usability, if you will, or user experience, if you will, for them when they're in school. And this could be curriculum materials, could be books, could be manipulatives. For math, it could be anything that a teacher would use in the elementary level. And that's one of the first things I noticed in walking through schools and being in classrooms, that teachers need different things in different schools. Like some schools have 5 of these and you can't find them in other schools. So we're trying to alleviate that strain and give kids and our teachers the things that they need to function well in the classrooms. And then the 7th grade iPads spun out of last year. There was money from the government for COVID that could be used for technology, and there was a purchase made of iPads for 7th grade, right? 7th and 8th grade, so last school year. So then we came into the moral dilemma of we've paid for 2 years of iPads for kids, and families didn't have to take out a lease or pay for them, however, like they were previous to this. And we thought it was important to continue to do that, rather than say, oh yeah, by the way, that group got free iPads, you got to pay for yours. So for us, it was a move that we think we can also alleviate this interesting problem that happens at high school. When kids get to their sophomore-ish junior year, they switch to a laptop automatically, which is great, but it's fascinating to watch. So we figure 7th grade iPads, 8th grade iPads, 9th grade iPads, then sophomore, junior year, they start to make that transition. And generally kids bring in their own device at that time. So it's kind of an alignment, if you will, through the years. Yes?
That was exactly the point that I was going to make, is that they become obsolete. So here we were purchasing these iPads, we didn't have to purchase the iPads. They become obsolete, they get dropped for the 107th time.
Yeah.
Just like my laptop.
With those indestructible, covers, but they do, they all switch anyway.
Yep.
By junior, senior year, they aren't even using them anymore. So I wasn't sure where you were headed with this and why 7th grade. So did the district pay for that, but they paid for COVID money that they received?
It was paid for last year out of COVID, right? Yeah,
Yes.
ESSER funds, COVID money. And then we gave our 6th graders this year, the 6th graders have Chromebooks that we had here. So we gave out all these Chromebooks last year during COVID. We collected those back, refurbished them, and gave them to the 6th graders. So 6th graders use Chromebooks right now. 7th grade kids will transition to iPad, use that. We're hoping 7th, 8th, 9th, maybe 10th, depending on the situation. And kids generally transition on their own. They really make that choice when they get older at the high school level. Does that make sense? Yes.
Kind of sad. So as a parent of a middle school child as well as high school, when COVID hit, a big part of what the district was supplying us is we couldn't guarantee that your child had a device at home and they could be on all the time, right? So it was sort of partially a pandemic issue, right?
Right.
Especially when we were in hybrid school, we had to have devices. But now everything has moved so much to be in Google Classroom that the kids use them all the time.
Right.
And I have a 11th grader, I agree, last year he asked for a Chromebook for Christmas. They get to a point where some of the work they need to do in preschool, they can't do on an iPad anymore, so it's a natural.
It's a natural transition also as they start thinking about college. So they're talking with teachers who are saying, okay, you're going to be writing more. When at the lower levels, you're using it much more like a tablet where, kids will have a pencil and they'll do their math work on the iPad and turn it in through Google Classroom. That changes as kids get older, and we see that transition right around that sophomore, junior year switch. So it's an opportunity for us to try to continue that process rather than saying, hey, by the way, here's another fee. So we're just trying to spread things out a little bit so that we can better meet the needs of our kids and our teachers. Other questions?
I had a question about the OPEB.
Sure, OPEB, yes.
You actually answered my question. So my question was is that something that we should have been doing all along and we weren't? It sounds like it was.
Yes.
Anyway, I just want to thank you for doing this and explaining everything. I'm really happy to see a lot of the things you're putting back in. I really do think it strengthens the district as a whole. So thank you guys for your work on this. I know it's a lot of work.
We appreciate it. And OPEB, I think, is difficult to understand. I would say probably 10 years ago was the first time people started saying, hey, you got to invest in OPEB. And then every year after that, the towns were saying to us in the school department, when are you going to start your OPEB fund? When are you going to start your OPEB fund? So it was continually put off. And this opportunity, we actually have in the budget $100,000 that was outside of that OPEB money. We were originally just going to start it with that this year. And then the OPEB money gave us the opportunity to get a jump on it. And when you think about investing that amount of money, people say, well, why don't you just give it back to the towns? The future liability of this funding is in the $50 million range. It may be higher, when you start to project out your retirees and what you're paying. So then when you start to say, we can build this fund so that our kids, when they're our age, can use that money to offset that cost, which is currently a little over $1 million in a budget. That's a huge, huge drop in a budget for the future, and I think it's an important opportunity. When we put that much money into the account, we also get an increased rate of return. So if you start a fund with 100,000, you get this kind of dinky rate of return like you get on a checking account, 1% or some 2%. The more money you have invested in your OPEB fund changes that coupon price, like what the cost is that what you get for interest over time. And then also, by putting that $2 million in, we reduce our future liability by almost $15 million. So making that jump brings that future number down. That liability is always going to be there. It's not going to go away. Teachers are going to continue to retire, and as I said earlier, teachers retire at around 57 and a half, many teachers, and then they're living long. The average human is living longer. So we have to contend with that over time. So we think it's an important investment to make. I personally believe it's the fiscally responsible thing to do. We had our meeting the other night with all 5 boards, the select boards from both towns and the FinComs from both towns, and every single one of them agreed that it was time. So it's not going to go away. So I think it's important to address it. We just have this one-time opportunity. I think it's important to address that now. For, as we said, our kids kind of took a hit during COVID. This is what we can do for them down the road. If they stay in our community, they'll benefit from this. Other questions? Well, thank you for coming. And again, anything that we presented here tonight is on the district website. And there's also a link to Ms. Caulfield's email. You can email her a question if you have it. She will compile those questions for us, as she has already. And if certainly anybody here tonight has another question, please feel free to let us know. We can answer our question or do the best we can.
You're all welcome to come to the meeting tomorrow night.
Yes,
School
committee tomorrow.
Public hearing is tomorrow night at Bucher at 7.
So the first public hearing is at 6:30.
6:30.
Tomorrow night, school committee meeting, 6:30 to 7. We have 2 public hearings, one for school choice and one for the budget. So you have an opportunity to let the school committee know about what you think about the budget, what you think is important about it. Even the athletics conversation is good for school committee people to know how people feel about it. I think I am 99% sure they all know exactly how we feel in the community about it, but it's good for us to continue to have those conversations in the community. So,
We've brought that conversation many times.
yeah. So we appreciate the time that you spent with us tonight, and those of you who are on YouTube with us, we appreciate your time, and certainly don't be a stranger. If you have questions, ask. We are around and about and want to be as open, as transparent as possible with our budget. So thank you.
Thank you guys for coming.